Let's just jump right into it.
You don't want to do
Can
any?
we still do City on the Edge, or is that?
Oh, yeah. What do you guys think?
I don't know. There's been people saying yes and people saying. Welcome to City on the Edge,
Hello.
Hey.
the podcast where we tell Albuquerque stories. I'm Ty Bannerman.
I am Ty Bannerman, and this is going to be weird. We've cloned ourselves just to make this introduction super special.
Confederate Albuquerque and
City on the Edge.
City on the Edge.
City on the Edge.
City on the
Edge.
City
We're here.
Wow, that was totally abrupt.
That's so nice.
Oh.
Well, thank you. We have a live audience. We're here at the historic Albuquerque Press Club.
Look at the good people in this room. I just can't believe what a great community we have here. I'm so happy. Look at all the people that are coming out from this.
Over there in the shadows, we had to get folding chairs down from upstairs. That's how many people we have. I mean, we're talking at
That's
least
serious.
like
And if
6 or 7 people.
Also, no, wait, there's like a couple
8 or 9
and
people.
quantity over
In the
quality,
double
man,
digits.
because this is some
They are very high quality people out
rating.
there. My mother-in-law,
Quality over quantity.
Denise,
That's-
in the
Sorry,
back.
I
My
have-
daughter.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so this is New Mexico's first podcast festival that you guys are a
The
part
first
of,
one.
including you who are watching at home on our live stream, because we have entered the 21st century with this episode.
Yeah.
So New Mexico's first podcast festival, Podscape.
I bet Leo York did one, but it was really racist, so it doesn't count.
Hey, I will not have you sully Leo York's good name.
Oh.
How dare you?
Damn.
Oh, that guy, what a douche.
And yet here he
We could do a whole
is. We're
show
talking
just
about
bashing
him.
He's like,
Somehow Mike's.
Hey, Mike, I'm
brings
glad
him
you
into
brought that
each
name
show.
up. Leo, could you please come out?
Oh, that
He
would
tried
be
to fight
something
me at
else. Something else.
Burt's. He tried to fight me at Burt's. It was
Our
hilarious.
special guest.
However, we do have the assistance of 10 drink minimum, Chris Burnett on the live stream-orama over there, working the mics. We've got Smiley, whose last name I don't know.
So when you were young, did you watch Carol
James.
Burnett's show?
Well, I
just
feel like
fucking
that's private information.
I'm fucking with you.
She's funny.
And then we have Billy, whose last name I also don't know, but
Belmont.
Billy Beaumont. So thank you guys so
Good
much
name.
for all
These
your
guys
help.
put in the time in the podcasting scene in Albuquerque. I think at one point they were like the only one. You
No,
know?
seriously,
The
foundation.
good stuff.
You know, they've carried a torch.
A lot of traditions.
And you know what? The Center for Southwest Research should collect their shows because they've interviewed pretty much everybody in the Albuquerque music scene. So that would be like a great resource to have about where Albuquerque was at in the 2010s.
That would be something. Yeah.
You know, that's my suggestion.
You were on our show, Mike Smith.
That's true. Twice.
Twice?
The second time was especially jolly. Boy, you guys really have an appropriate name, I gotta say. I don't even remember that interview. So okay.
Let's see who else we've had so far. What you've missed today? We've had Squaring the Strange with noted skeptic Ben Radford
that was
and
fun.
Pasquale, whose last time I also
Yeah.
don't know, but
Yeah, I
they
couldn't
talked
pronounce
about
it
the
either.
end of the world and
Yeah.
how it appears to not be happening today.
Yeah.
If
The
you'd
weather
mark-
is pretty bad, though.
it is actually.
How is it bad to have rain? Rain is amazing. I
Oh,
love
yeah,
it.
you're right.
If you marked your calendar for the end of the world as prophesied by the arrival of the planet Nibiru, I'm afraid you're probably feeling a little bit embarrassed right
Oh,
about
man.
now.
You guys, today was actually significant for me because Ben Radford and I used to have like a writing team a long time ago, and then I got super depressed and I just like dropped out of his life and like never returned his emails or calls for a long time. And I had been avoiding him for like 7 years, and today I finally talked to him and
It
like,
was
like,
very
I'm
sweet.
not gonna be a scared person anymore. I'm gonna like
Yes.
we
process shit
actually,
in my life, you know?
Ty coordinated this podcast fest for that moment.
Yeah,
That's
So-
right. It's all
like, you know, I was really
all
like,
about
I
bringing
wanted
that
to be
up.
out of it the second I heard he was going to be here. I'm like, no, I avoid him. So that was nice. It was a little-
highly charismatic math nerds of Breaking Math were here earlier. They talked about all kinds of stuff that kind of went over my head, but some of it was fractals, which sounded really cool.
Yeah.
And then Dating Another's Paths to Suicide with Oscar. I don't know if he's still here, but
He's a
I
Marxist.
think he
He's really
left.
cool.
yeah, he was awesome.
like that
so
guy.
they talked about the difficulties of dealing with one's exes. And in particular, I was sort of taken by his discussion about how you deal with an ex that you've had a child with, which, I mean,
Yeah.
I've been lucky not to have had any children with exes
Oh my God.
so far.
Let me tell you, as someone who has 4 kids with an ex, oh God, do not choose that life path if you have an option. I mean, pick a different one. Try another one. This one, I tested it. It's not good. You know, it's rough. It's like you basically have to see your ex every day. Oh my God,
Right.
we don't like each other. It's bad for her too. You
Well-
know, it's like.
Okay, so what Oscar said was it takes a lot of time, but eventually it becomes like a sort of a friendship with
Yeah.
somebody, like a
I'm working on
coworker or
myself. I'm
something
trying
like
to just
that.
be chill with everyone.
So that howl of disconsolate rage there,
Yeah.
it will pass.
yeah, no, and she's a nice person. It's just we're dumb people that picked each other at 22. You know.
Yeah, I
But-
mean, your mistake was
Yeah.
ever falling in love in the first
Yeah.
place.
Boy, this one got real
Jeez.
fast, man. Can we move on to what? Like tumbleweeds? Were there a lot of tumbleweeds or something last week? I don't know.
All right, but that's not what we're not here to talk about any of
Yeah,
those
yeah.
things. We are here to talk about Albuquerque and Albuquerque
yeah.
history. We're going to be discussing the history of the Whittlesey House, which is the environment that we find ourselves in. These storied and shadowed corners have quite a history behind them, so we're going to be talking
man.
about that. But first, we should probably introduce ourselves. I'm Ty Bannerman.
I'm Mike Smith.
I'm Nora Hickey.
She's wearing red because
Sorry.
she's a big Lobo supporter, not because she hates City on the Edge.
The
and
theme is
making some
McDonald's.
sort of statement against us.
Yeah.
We usually like to start these things with a little bit of Albuquerque news. So I was wondering if you guys had any Albuquerque news you
Oh
wanted to
man,
talk about.
I heard some sad Albuquerque news today. Should we talk sad Albuquerque news? Is that
Let's
okay?
not
I
be
feel like
too
we
sad.
should.
We just went to the X
That's true. Okay, man.
files.
All right. Well, curse the city because that's what came to mind.
What about we were talking earlier about the sort of smear campaign of Tim Keller
Oh,
that
yeah.
he supports
Tim Keller loves sex offenders.
sex
it turns out.
offenders.
Yeah.
According to a series of advertisements purchased by the man who is developing the Santolina subdivision, or community, I guess. And actually, Tim Keller is the only candidate who is apparently not taking money from this guy, and surprisingly is the only candidate who is at the receiving end of a smear campaign on television.
You guys, I went as an alibi reporter one time to a debate that was gubernatorial candidates, including Susana Martinez and all the others from that last race, and they were just talking to housing developers. That was it, just housing developers. It was so corrupt, and they were all
Gross.
just like basically saying, "We'll get rid of all the regulations. We'll do everything we can to help you and keep you here in our community." I mean, it was a massive suck-up fest. Holy shit. Sorry. Oh, I shouldn't. Yeah, I'll keep it clean. But anyway, we have a corrupt government. That's all I'm saying.
There's the
all right.
That's the news.
All right.
you
What's
want to tell the story about the guy who stole the green chili
Oh
cheeseburger?
yeah, this happened in Santa Fe, but
Whatever.
I feel like it could happen in Albuquerque.
Yeah.
So you know the green chili smackdowns that happen to see who has the best green chili cheeseburger? Well, this was a real life green chili cheeseburger smackdown because someone slapped someone with a green chili cheeseburger and stole it and ran away. And then he was found.
I'm
in
a little
jail.
sad this didn't happen in Albuquerque. It seems like a very Albuquerque story.
Yeah.
I feel like Santa Fe doesn't deserve a story that beautiful.
That crime is almost wholesome.
I know. And he apparently did a little dance, kind of some,
Yeah. Oh, that's nice.
He did a dance
He kind of distracted him
with a
There
dance.
was a
He
dance
distracted
and then
him
a
with
slap.
dancing.
Yeah.
And then slapped him and took his burger.
Yeah.
You guys, I just got to say, isn't it cool that we have a community of people that are just listening to us talk right now? That's freaking insane. What a supportive community.
Enjoy it while it lasts.
Would I do
Yeah,
that
I'm
for
like,
anyone?
they're turning off one
The guy
by
just
one.
left.
How cool.
It did make me want to try that cheeseburger though, because that's
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
like the
it was
Shake
the
Foundation.
Go
Shake
together.
Foundation.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it looked like, wow, if that's what they're. So maybe it's a viral marketing stunt.
Yeah. Oh,
in which
damn it.
case it
Oh.
is extremely successful.
Yeah, it worked. Hey, what do you got there?
I have something from 1989. Actually, we've been talking a lot about the invasion of raccoons in Albuquerque this year and how they've been murdering our chickens and turtles mercilessly. So what I have here is a publication printed by the Albuquerque Press Club in 1989. It's called the Ape Sheet. Get it?
They had an annual newspaper
yeah.
here just for the press club
That's cool.
for a long time.
And I'm just going to read you the first paragraph because I think it's kind of beautiful. The real reason for the Great Bear invasion of Albuquerque of 1989 was not because of lack of food, but really an act of sabotage by agents of the Soviet Union. So it all goes downhill from there. But I'm just we should count our blessings that it's just raccoons and not so. But then we got Russian issues right now
It's crazy.
too. So Russians and raccoons, and they had bears in the Soviet Union.
But now our fears are real. It's great.
It's true. Those raccoons are vicious.
Oh yeah, I was
Yeah.
thinking more Russian hackers, but oh man, craziness. Well, that was interesting. Yeah, we spent like the afternoon looking at these old newspapers, and they are interesting.
There's
if you can
some
get one of the
fascinating
bartenders
ones.
to let you look at those, do it.
They go
They're
all the
great.
way back to 1975 or so.
Yeah. No, I saw a 1968 one.
Did you really?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
The way Hallie, who's the manager of the place that we're at, said, she said that in the backs of them are lots of hairy, naked women. So
I didn't find that to be the case.
it's true. I was looking.
Weird.
Did
Now
not
there's
find
going to
them,
be a
so-
rush for.
Yeah, exactly. So I have to
Yeah.
just say, you can check it out.
And they're a little
see
bit
if you can
racist.
find
There's a
them,
joke
too.
about wetbacks, quote unquote.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Oh well, too bad.
you know.
But it's kind of interesting. They talk a lot of smack about local politicians from the 70s. Boy, they really stick it to Mayor Kenny.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
They say
poor
he
guy.
cavorts with sex bots.
yeah,
Gosh.
kind of
Yeah.
ahead of their time in 1977.
Weird.
And speaking of the press club, which is where we are now, we're going to be talking about its history.
Yeah.
This building that we're in actually dates all the way back to 1903. It's one of the oldest buildings in the part of Albuquerque we call Newtown. As we stated many times before on the podcast, but we might have people here who are not kind of following our every single word that we've stated over the last 2 years. But Old Town Albuquerque.
Shame on you all. Shame on you all that haven't followed every podcast episode. All right, just leave. Just go.
No.
No, please stay.
Mike. I can understand
Totally
you're
kidding.
upset.
Totally kidding.
So Old Town Albuquerque was founded in 1706 as the Villa de Albuquerque. Newtown Albuquerque wasn't founded until about 1881 or so.
When the railroad came through.
That's right. When the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad set its rails down about a mile and a half away from where Old Town is, and a whole new community sprang up around it. A lot of it built up by Easterners, people who came from the eastern United States out here in order to, build their fortune and so forth. Because the railroad came... Oh, did you have...
No, keep going. Keep
Okay.
going. I'll tell it at the end.
So because the railroad came through, there was suddenly what they called the Open West. This was basically the Western United States suddenly accessible for the first time to people who weren't ready to just, end their lives in the East and live out West. Now it was open to people who just maybe wanted to travel around through the area. And the Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe Railroad was right at the front of that, and they were building hotels along their railway through the West. A lot of them were Harvey houses. Fred Harvey was kind of the first tourism magnate in the United States, and he had his name all over the West.
Yeah.
And so they were interested in having a Harvey house here. People from the East could come out and see, the romantic culture of the Spanish Americans and the Native Americans, and the way that they live so differently than us Easterners, and you can do all that from without having to go and camp out in the backwoods or anything. You could just stay in a hotel in town.
Wow. And they got one too. It was in the Alvarado. It was
Yeah.
an old
So
train
actually,
station.
the first thing that was built was a depot with a small hotel attached to it. It was called the Harvey Depot. They basically just served some lunch. However, it was successful enough that they decided to expand it. And so they brought in their chief architect, Charles Frederick Whittlesey, who was 33 at the time. He was named the chief architect for all the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. So he was in
A big
charge.
deal.
Yeah, he was in charge of designing every.
Which Chinese slave labor built, by the way, the railroad? I think we should mention that every time we talk about it. Chinese slave labor.
Fair enough.
All right.
Yeah.
Basically, they were paid nothing. A Chinaman's
true,
chance in
yeah.
hell. That phrase came from the building of the Transcontinental Railroad.
Did it?
We should think about that every time. Yeah,
Okay.
In my opinion.
All right.
Okay. All right. Keep going.
Good context.
Read Iris
So-
Chang's book, The Chinese in America. Incredible.
Charles Frederick Whittlesey was he was 33 when he was named the chief architect for all the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. He was from Illinois. He had actually studied architecture and learned his trade in an office with Frank Lloyd Wright.
And with Louis Sullivan,
Louis Sullivan was his mentor.
who supposedly Ayn Rand based a character off of in The Fountainhead.
Not an honor. Not an honor.
Yeah, it was Henry Cameron
She
in
sucks,
The Fountainhead.
you guys. Don't read her. She fucking sucks.
She based Henry Cameron after this guy?
After Whittlesey's
She
mentor.
wrote Pulp
Sullivan.
romances. You think it's a page turner? No, it's corrupt. It's awful.
Well, I mean, while we're so who was Cameron in the book? Do you know? Was this?
No, I've never read
okay, I
it.
haven't
Sorry.
read it either.
And I never will.
A self-started millionaire, no doubt.
I got thrown out of a car once hitchhiking because I got picked up by an Ayn Rand fan. It did not go well.
That's like the least surprising story you've told so far today. Well, I've lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
But
Oh,
yes.
there we
Sorry,
go.
Whittlesey.
But he worked in Chicago with Frank Lloyd Wright.
He
Louis
worked
Sullivan.
in Chicago. Yes.
According to one account I read, he won a design contest
did
to
he?
become the chief of the railroad company.
Well,
He had
I
to
do
draw the
know
best
that
flag or something.
when he was about 22 or so, he married a 12-year-old girl, which
Oh my God!
The good old days.
I found an ancestor like that. Oh God!
I in the article I read this in, it was an old one. It was actually by Mary Lou Heafy. She wrote the account of him in the 1980s. So she was, well, I'll get into her later, but she said that he married a very beautiful 12-year-old girl.
Oh my God!
If that makes it any
It's like
better.
my daughter.
Oh.
Out of my head. Yeah.
Anyway,
creepy. Was he like
a different time?
fundamentalist
I don't
Mormon?
know. We don't know exactly what the story there was. There's actually not a huge amount of information about Charles Whittlesey.
You guys, this is a mysterious space that we're in right now. Whittlesey built. Are you going to talk about how he built the lodge at the Grand Canyon?
Absolutely. So when he was 33 years old, he was named chief architect. In 1902, he moved here to Albuquerque to begin working on the Alvarado Hotel. I wondered, sadly, we don't have a picture of it, but it's one of the great classic Harvey houses. It no longer exists because our city saw fit, well, not our city, but the Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe Railroad saw fit to demolish it in favor of a parking lot in 1971.
That hurts.
Apparently, it was beautiful and an early example of poured concrete architecture.
So you all know the city went crazy in the 70s, right? And they just ripped
urban
down
renewal.
tons of historic stuff. There's actually a mural about this downtown by the Lotus nightclub.
However, we are fortunate enough to have two of the three buildings that Charles Whittlesey designed still existing here in Albuquerque.
Yeah.
We are sitting here in one of them. This is the Whittlesey home. He designed it and built it for himself and his family. He designed it at the exact same time that he was working on El Tovar Lodge at the Grand Canyon. And if you ever go there, it looks like this same design with the rough-hewn logs and this kind of weird, they call it like apparently it's like a Nordic fantasia of a woodland cottage is what they are.
It's a
going
strange
for.
structure. He really built something interesting, really.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
rambles off of every side of this hill. It
And
has
so you can go
outbuildings.
there, and it's the expensive place at the Grand Canyon. If you're going to stay at one of the original Harvey lodges
El
there.
Tovar. I have a whole book about it. It's just pictures of the lodge. People care
Really?
about the history of that place now too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of beautiful.
Yeah. It looks
so-
like this, but bigger.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
this was the design aesthetic that he was working in at that time. Then when he for the Alvarado Hotel, he was into this idea of Southwest regionalism. But if you've ever seen a picture of the Alvarado Hotel, it looks nothing like the Southwest regionalism of New Mexico.
Yeah.
It looks like California mission style, as far as I'm concerned.
Well said, well said.
And that was basically because the architecture that we associate with New Mexico, which is Pueblo Revival, kind of colonial Spanish, flat roof, adobe, kind of rounded corners and that kind of thing. It hadn't come into any kind of vogue for modern at that time architects. They just didn't really see it at that point. And it wasn't until 2 years later when President William Tite of the University of New Mexico built the first Pueblo Revival structures that were influenced by Pueblo architecture.
Yeah.
So as far as Whittlesey was concerned, Southwestern architecture was this kind of weird mission style from California.
Wasn't Tite also the guy who planted those trees at the corner of University and Central, and it's called Tite's Grove?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly
And
right.
he had students bring them from the Sandias as little seedlings down and plant them. So cool. I love that.
That's nice.
Yeah. It's just a good story.
Yeah.
I mean, it is removing stuff from the wild, but I love those trees. I like every time we
Yeah, they're
passed
still
through those,
there.
I was like, these are great.
Southwest corner of the university.
Let's give it up for those trees, you guys. We all love the trees at the corner of University and Central.
Am I
Come
applauding
on.
for trees now?
What are they, like Ponderosa pines?
Is that where my life has gone? I'm applauding for trees. They're
It
nice
just
trees.
doesn't happen enough.
So that's the corner of Central and University. You can see that grove there, and in
Yeah.
fact, the structure behind
Across from the street from Wendy's. So get a delicious square hamburger.
it. Yes,
And then go.
we are hoping for a
To
Wendy's
the-
sponsorship.
Man.
I assume that's why we're.
When Wendy's closed, when Dave Thomas, who died, the guy who founded Wendy's, remember that? It was like 10 years ago. When he died, my brother made the funniest joke. He's like, I guess they're going to close down all the Wendy's now. And I don't know. There's something about that stuck
And
with me.
you guys-
It's
I'm reminded of the
it's so funny
calculus
to
jokes
imagine.
from
Well,
earlier.
Dave Thomas is dead.
Dave
It's been a good
Thomas
run.
played piano in the Albuquerque Press Club behind
What?
Ty.
Oh.
Look at that
Oh,
plaque.
that's
But
a
he's
lie.
the guy from New Mexicans for Science and Reason.
This is a
Yeah.
different Dave Thomas. Yes, the piano behind us is dedicated to Dave Thomas, but
Yeah. He's cool.
let's just say it's the Wendy's guy. The Wendy's guy hung out here.
I have an audience question. So you were talking about like Pueblo Revival aesthetic.
Yeah.
What do you feel this lodge is? Like what is there a name for it?
That's a good question. So it's like Norwegian cottage. Is
Good question, man.
I
like
think
what everything that I've-
craftsman.
That's what you've
it's
read?
partially
Craftsman?
craftsman log.
Yeah.
Norwegian cabin.
Don't you guys
Honest
just feel good in
Norwegian.
it? Isn't it a welcoming space? Don't you like it? I love this
It is,
room.
except I'm afraid it's going to catch on fire literally any
Yeah.
second.
Can
Very
I tell you guys
flammable.
the funniest
Wow,
thing
I
I've
don't
seen
say
in
that.
this room before? It made me laugh so hard. Ty was here, and he was the food editor for the Alibi at the time. And Seth was here, and he was the beer critic for Local IQ, and those were like feuding papers here. You guys remember? And and Ty was like, I guess we'll just use these to start the fire. And he gets a bunch of Local IQs and crumples them up and puts them under there. And Seth is like, and and he's like, well, I guess I'll just use this old rag over here and see if we can get it going with a tripod. And it was just so funny.
I'd burn them
watching these
both
two.
now for damn sure.
Hilarious. I guess the Alibi survived in some form, but it's kind of
The
a
alibi
zombie.
survives.
Yeah.
Man. Oh, hey, we were so the Alvarado.
Yes.
So okay,
Yeah.
an interesting thing about the Alvarado. Charles
hear it.
Whittlesey designed the exterior, but the interior was designed by Mary Coulter, who I understand you kind of looked into a little bit about her
Oh,
career.
that's
right?
yeah, from Minnesota, and was one of the few female architect interior designers working
Cool.
at the time.
Yeah, she was kind of being like his apprentice at that point, I think.
What's her
when-
last name?
Coulter.
Coulter.
Mary
Colter.
So she did the interior of the Alvarado, which is apparently quite a thing to behold.
Yeah.
And then she impressed the higher ups at the Harvey Company so much that she became one of their official architects, and she designed Bright Angel Lodge
Oh,
at
that's
the
a big
Grand
deal.
Canyon.
Named by John Wesley Powell, that canyon, to match the Dirty Devil River. Oh, it's a cool lodge right where you take a zigzagging trail down to Havasupai Falls. It's amazing down there.
Well,
go
it's-
see it if you get a chance. Whoa.
It's definitely from a different time of what we do with like beautiful natural wonders. The Harvey Company was like, great, this beautiful natural wonders. Let's put a hotel on it, like
Yeah,
literally
there's that.
on the rim. Like we want people to like be afraid they're gonna fall off when they walk out the door. Supposedly for El Tovar, they actually had a plan of like making a balcony that went out over the rim, but Theodore Roosevelt himself voided that. He was like, no, you can't do that.
Now they have
That's
that. There's
too
that
much.
transparent bridge.
Yeah,
that goes out
that's a
on
different
tribal
place.
land.
Yeah.
So cool.
But yeah, El Tovar is like
I mean,
20 feet away
kind of a
from the
desecration,
rim.
but cool.
Bright Angels, like you can sit in the Bright Angel dining room and like the beautiful picture glass window and look just out over the landscape. And it's something that I don't approve of for any, like, I'm glad it's not happening now, but it's kind of cool that it happened back then, that you can sit there and just like be in this crazy old cabin, right on the rim. It's kind of awesome,
You guys-
in a way.
It is. The press club retains an old time. It's so cool,
Yeah.
isn't it? Like the way that it just retains this old time. I'm kind of glad we're talking about this. We can just talk about this cool space.
And I like to think that Mary visited, the Whittlesey
so
family.
many ghost stories. I mean, I
She
think
must have been in here at some
And
point,
I read she
right?
was a chain smoking perfectionist, so it's perfect. Her
That's cool.
smoke is in the
I'd like to know more about her.
cigarettes are
Yeah.
gross, but she
Yeah.
does sound cool.
yeah.
So I have a little story here from one of Charles's daughters. I believe this was written by Beatrice, who was his second oldest daughter.
The architect's daughter.
Yeah, so she said it's called The Rattlesnake. And I like this because it's got a little bit of a description of this very room that we're sitting in. It was while I was there in Albuquerque that Austin, which was Whittlesey's oldest son, shot the snake. You were living in the big log house on the edge of the mesa. The living room was 60 feet, actual size, long, and an immense fireplace with log stumps on the hearth where we used to crack nuts in the evening or make candy and tell stories. There were a great many large easy chairs, Indian rugs, huge baskets and pottery, making it cozy, although it was very large. Surrounding this room on three sides was a 10-foot veranda. It was all very beautiful with a marvelous view. I saw a huge rattlesnake lying across the beams, head raised, mouth wide open with a forked tongue lashing in and out, and a poor little bird not a foot away trying to keep it from her nest. I immediately called the family. Edie was down sewing, and Austin had just come in and still had his cowboy hat on. He couldn't have been much past 11, if he was even that, but he had manly ways, and and felt
I love old phrases like that. That's so great.
and felt his responsibilities, his father being away from home a great deal. He naturally took the lead, got his gun, and shot the snake at the first aim. Then he skinned it and found 4 of the bird's eggs inside. So I like that, that was something that literally happened just a few feet away from where we're staying.
Oh, you guys, we are in a big story.
And of course, that points out something. So this porch here, the view would not have been of the highway, nor would it have been of the neighborhoods beyond, but rather of a series of sandhills kind of going off into the distance until the Sandia Mountain herself rose up in the distance. Because this was pretty much the edge of town where we're at now. In
Why
fact,
did we change it? That sounds way better.
the March of Progress.
God damn it.
Yeah.
I want to just look out and see beautiful desert and mountains. Oh, it's amazing. So glad I live here. Now it's just this concrete. No, I like it still.
Yeah. So anyway, the city clearly. But this was like the Dusty Plain, and if you go into the hall over here at some point later this evening, there's a series of old sepia photographs on the wall that show what it looked like out here, with just basically this house and nothing else around it, and it was a beautiful spot. So Charles Whittlesey did not spend much time here. He was always moving around because he was designing, all kinds of hotels and so forth. His family stayed here until about 1906.
That's the number on the door plaque right there.
Oh.
Dun, dun, dun.
Wow.
Don't say it 3 times. Don't.
But something happened in 1906 that changed his career and his life. Any student of history know of anything that happened in 1906 on the west coast of the United States?
Oh, was that the San Francisco earthquake?
Mike, you're not supposed to answer that.
Oh, shit. Oh, sorry. Well, I was just excited. I've been watching a lot of Jeopardy on my phone. It's making me quick.
Yes.
Speedy.
Although I want to point out that when my son was about 2 years old, I used to say to him, "And what does the cow say?" And my wife, without fail, would go, "Moo." as though I were asking her what the cow said. So I just had a bit of a
Courtney, you're
flashback
hilarious.
I'd be like, Courtney, I'm really not asking you what the cow said.
That's
I
funny.
think we've covered that in our many conversations about what different animals
Who hasn't
say.
done something like that, man?
I think probably most new
Yeah.
parents do that
Yeah,
at some
yeah.
points.
Oh yeah, what about
Yes,
the earthquake?
It was the earthquake. Yeah, come up to the
There's
audience
audience
if you want
mic.
to say
Do you have
something.
a question?
Simon Winchester wrote a really good book about that earthquake.
What-
Have you guys read
it
that?
was the
No.
It's
earthquake.
excellent. Good popular history of it.
So suddenly there was a need for architects, especially ones who were familiar with the then revolutionary technique of pouring concrete. So he was brought out to San Francisco to work, and so he and his family left this house that we're in. By 1908, they were fully moved out, and it sat vacant for a while after that.
Wow, that-
So-
Wow.
That makes this place a place of international importance. He went to San Francisco, man. That brings in that into the story of this place right here.
Absolutely.
You know, and that earthquake, that was crazy. I guess those events really were big events. I found an ancestor going through Chicago right after the Great Chicago Fire. I guess everybody, like, we all got here somehow, and so people must have existed in these big events, right? We all lived through 9/11 and stuff.
that
You know?
is true.
You know?
Not all of us. There might be some
Yeah.
young people here.
Yeah, that's true.
It was purchased by a number of different parties. It's unclear how many people lived there. Did you find much in the way of information, Nora? I know you were kind of poring over some
Yeah.
of the people.
The next noted one was Theodore Woolsey, who was a junior assistant district forest ranger, and he got it, I believe, 1908 to 1920.
Oh, okay. So he actually owned the house during that period.
Yeah.
It seems that he didn't live here, though, because a little bit before 1920, it looks like about 1916, a woman with the kind of unusual name of Clifford Myrick
Cliffy.
came to Albuquerque. Her name was Clifford, apparently, because her father was hoping for a boy, and
What an asshole. Seriously.
he was committed to the idea. Weirdly, though, she's also listed as Clara at various points, but the story her daughter gave was that her name was Clifford because her father wanted a boy and was just gonna go with Clifford. She was from Louisiana. She worked as a nurse and found that there was a need for nurses who were willing to work with tuberculosis patients in that area.
Oh, yeah.
There was a lot of fear about tuberculosis at that point. And so people naturally didn't want to be in proximity with somebody with a terrible contagious disease.
So tuberculosis brought her here, but she didn't have it? Is that what
No,
you're saying? No.
she
She was a
escorted
nurse.
patients out here from Louisiana.
Oh.
According to the precepts of climatology, which was the best bet for dealing with tuberculosis at that
Okay.
point in the era before antibiotics, the idea was that tuberculosis was caused by toxic wet air from swamps, and it was cured by dry, cool air in arid places.
Man.
So if you're in Louisiana, you want to get out.
Man,
Right.
the only thing swamps will cause is toenail fungus. I walked across the Everglades once, and that is bad. Your feet just rot inside your shoes. It's horrible. I knew a guy, and he had hiked it so many times that he had his toenails surgically removed, and he showed me, and it was kind of gross because it wasn't well done. There were like slivers of nails
Oh.
still there and stuff.
Jeez.
His name was
doesn't sound
Nimbleville
very
Nomad, and he
surgical.
would tell you a poem anytime.
Well, tuberculosis was no picnic either, my friends. It led to the coughing up of immense amounts of sputum and a slow
Oh,
wasting
no.
away.
Ugh.
So if you had it and there was no
Damn.
real known cure at that
Ugh.
point other than move away, you wanted to get out of wherever you were, especially if it was swampy and you wanted to go somewhere dry. About the turn of the century, Albuquerque and New Mexico began marketing themselves as health country. And Albuquerque had the bright idea that we were the heart of health country. We were supposed to be like the coolest, driest climate, close to a major railroad. And so people came from all over the country to recuperate from tuberculosis here in town. And sanatoriums began springing up all over. In fact, right about this time, if you look out in that direction, instead of the highway and instead of vast rolling hills going all the way to the Sandia Mountain, you would have seen the Albuquerque Sanatorium springing up and Presbyterian Sanatorium springing up. And then there were a number of others kind of just all around. These were places where people who had TB would go, and the whole idea of how to cure yourself was that you would be exposed to the air, so you would sleep on your porch, and you would have a little cabin maybe. Maybe sometimes people slept in tents if they were poorer. They had their meals were cooked over open fires, and they were exposing themselves to the fresh air as much as possible.
And this area had a lot.
Oh yeah, it was huge. I mean, there was Shortle Sanatorium, there was Albuquerque Sanatorium, Presbyterian Sanatorium, Washington Sanatorium, Methodist Deaconess Sanatorium, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So Clifford would be circulating this area.
Well, she liked it
a
out
lot.
here. So she came out in 1916 as a nurse escort for a patient.
Sounds racy.
It may have been.
Is it? No.
She was an independent woman. It's not clear that might have been going on, but she certainly seemed to have a rather modern attitude toward love. So she came out in 1916 for the first time. She liked the area, and she enjoyed it. She said, well, climatology, it worked so well, it either cured patients or killed them.
Roll
And
the dice.
There you go.
So
Why
she
doesn't
said
God
every
cure
time she had a
animals?
patient die, she would go back to Louisiana and get another one and bring him out here. Because of course the thing is, the
how you
cool,
run a
dry
business.
air of Albuquerque is not necessarily going to cure your tuberculosis.
But you might
Antibiotics
get
do.
better.
Yeah, you might get better
Yeah.
just because sometimes
Look,
people got
Right.
better.
Here's the thing, though. Fresh air, sunshine, those are awesome things.
It's probably
Being out
better
in the
than
open,
dying in a swamp.
It's cool. Go get that anyway. You're going to die, man. You got
Yeah,
tuberculosis.
exactly. It was the number one. It was the number one cause of death for people under like 30 in 1905
Oh,
or something
wow.
in Albuquerque specifically.
Ah.
And I mean, there was an aspect of magical thinking to the whole climatology thing. Like early promotional materials say, the Native Americans who live in New Mexico have never had tuberculosis before. Well, that was because they hadn't been exposed, right? And
Right.
it wasn't because they were in the cool, dry air. And so all these Easterners came out with tuberculosis, and then guess what happened? Suddenly there were a bunch of Native American and Spanish American people who were coming down with tuberculosis in the area.
Right.
And all the rich Easterners could afford to be set up in these beautiful sanatoriums with their own cabin and people cooking for them and people cleaning for them. But the poorer population couldn't. And so suddenly there was a crisis associated with that, which we'll get into a little bit. But that was what brought Clifford out.
What year are we at again? This is 1960.
It's about 1916.
Okay. Interesting time.
She met a man named Arthur B. Hall, who took her fancy. He was a good talker and kind of a dynamic person. He owned a pharmacy at the corner of Gold and 2nd Street, which is where the art bar was, and I don't think anything
Isn't that
else
weird?
is now.
I don't think so.
What was the pharmacy called? So I can
It was
remember.
called, I don't know what it was
I think it
called.
was Hall Pharmacy.
Hall
Yeah.
Pharmacy.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Easy to remember.
Yeah.
And they took picnics around town. And so the story is that one day they were picnicking on the hills just east of where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, marry me. And she said, I will if you buy me that house. And
Oh
she
my
pointed
God.
at the press club. She pointed at the Whittlesey house.
Oh, that's a great story.
And he said, okay.
I like that. That's so shallow and huge. Awesome.
So in 1920, he bought the house. It had been abandoned for quite some time. Her daughter describes the kind of furniture that was here. It was oak tables inlaid with ivory and things that had
Whoa.
just laid abandoned
Ugh.
for quite some time.
Hate ivory. Evil.
Yeah, but it was. Can we say it was cool back then?
Don't kill elephants. They're beautiful. They're intelligent. They mourn their dead.
They moved in. They had a few children. At least I think 3 children. and they kind of became a social center for Albuquerque. She was as I mentioned, kind of an independent person. She was big into like the flapper thing. Apparently really good at dancing the Charleston. She did like all the 1920s stereotypical things. She danced the Charleston. She wore a flapper hat. She brewed gin in a bathtub upstairs. This was what she did.
Everyone did.
And she had like artists come through. People like Will Rogers supposedly stayed here. Various artists who were, on their way to the Taos Artist Commune would stop in at this house and stay here.
What's your read on Will Rogers? Was he cool? I don't know.
Well,
Probably.
that's a good question.
I feel like I've listened to some of his material.
Yeah.
And I bet it was really funny back then, but it did not get a chuckle.
Oh, yeah.
When I want to laugh, I read the newspaper. Like, that's just, it's become
Oh, he wrote
so,
a column, right?
Yeah.
But he was in movies and stuff, too, right?
A few, yeah.
Weird.
Yeah.
He was a singing cowboy?
Was he?
I guess.
I don't know.
Oh,
But-
weird. Does anyone know anything about Will Rogers? No? Okay, here comes Chris.
Oh, good.
Chris
Okay.
Burnett, host
I
of
like
10
that
Drink
he's got a bit
Minimum.
of a swag.
He was in westerns.
Yeah.
And he had Trigger the horse.
No, no. That's
Oh.
Roy Rogers. Roy Rogers.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Sit back down.
Maybe I'm
Oh.
conflating those
Jeez.
two also. No, I think he helped us sort
Will
something
Rogers
out. I think it's
is Roy
conflating
Rogers.
Roy Rogers with Will Rogers.
Who was Howdy Doody with?
Oh, he's a puppet or something.
Oh, okay.
Oh, here we go.
Mark,
Here we go.
something.
Someone from the
Mark
audience.
Woody, art legend and owner of the largest tie collection in New Mexico.
Really?
Amazing. Just an
Hello.
amazing collection.
Howdy.
Hi.
Hey.
Will Rogers was a humorist.
Yes.
And a bit of on the conservative side,
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Okay.
but wildly popular.
And this is like 1920s, so
20s,
conservative
30s.
back then.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
Thank you.
was
Thanks,
probably
Mark.
to the left of Bernie Sanders now.
That guy once opened for Henry Rollins with his wife.
like his conservative sentiments. I don't think we should have a violent communist overthrow of the U.S. government.
Yet. We must wait for the right time.
So let's see who else stayed here. The Mayo brothers came out. They founded the Mayo Clinic. They stayed here on.
They didn't discover mayonnaise.
Oh, ouch. Dang.
Shoot,
I like this-
I totally
This inky,
blundered
thick
that.
silence from the audience, I think, should tell you all you need to know about that
Honestly, I
joke.
missed the joke setup, so
You usually hate my puns.
I just don't like puns in general. I think they're easy.
They were great friends with.
Sorry, I
You
just
hate
my opinion.
puns.
Whatever.
I respect that.
They were great friends with Dr.
fun of
Lovelace, who founded the Lovelace Clinic, which was also here for the treatment of tuberculosis. He came out because he had tuberculosis and he recovered and then began treating people. And to Clifford's credit, I mentioned that a lot of the local population came down with tuberculosis and didn't have the money to treat it. She offered up her own porch to people who stayed here.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And got the fresh air out on the porch there.
Interesting.
She was close friends with the Martinezes, including Maria Martinez from San Ildefonso Pueblo.
The inventor of the black on black pottery style.
Right. In
A
fact-
lo-
Oh.
yeah.
If you look at this fireplace over here, it's got these recesses in it. Those were apparently filled with Maria Martinez black on black San Ildefonso pottery.
Yeah,
back in the day.
and her husband Julian were archaeologists, and they were looking at these sites. This is the story; it's disputed in some quarters, but they were looking at old pottery shards, and she found some that were scratched, not just painted. And that like this ancient style inspired her to do this in her new style, and she kind of resurrected this old thing and made it modern and elegant.
cool.
She really did have a neat style. And what was really cool too is she shared this technology with everyone in the pueblo, and it was this wonderful economic and cultural boon for the whole pueblo.
Neat.
So pretty cool, and it
Yeah.
revitalized other pueblos like Santa Clara that took the style as well and ran with it. I mean, really neat.
Wow.
You know. Anyway, keep going. This is great stuff.
Okay, so so as I mentioned, she had some children here. One of whom was her daughter, named Mary Lou Heafy. She was a lifelong Albuquerque resident and grew up in this house. And she has a brief reminiscence I thought that I would share with you guys. When Cliffy moved in, 6 large windows afforded a magnificent and vast view of the ambling ridges and dry hills. As there was little growth on the sandy, rocky hills, they appeared endless, stretching for miles, with only the high mountains off the horizon. At that time, there were few houses this large in Albuquerque. The immensity of the house took my breath away as a child. Looking down to the north, the stone houses sitting on Gold Street appeared tiny from the heights of the hill. I was king of the mountain, powerful. It was a peaceful atmosphere. The front entrance on the eastern side of the house opens into the living room, the showplace of the Hall log house. That's how she refers to it. It was indeed such a lovely location that more marriages were performed there than any other private residence in town. Even strangers call and ask permission to marry in front of the fireplace. It is so romantic. How could I ever say no? Cliffy would lament. That fireplace, made of volcanic lava rocks, certainly did dominate the living room and drew attention immediately as it was directly opposite the massive front door. Also greeting us as we entered was a large 2-foot bronze foo dog who guarded the hearth from his teak wooden platform. He appeared to snort smoke from his mouth and nostrils, issuing an aroma of pine scent. Fires were continually burning within the immense interior of the massive fireplace. They cast a soft glow on the brown bark walls and created a warm welcome. Decorative features of the fireplace were the nichos in the front. These recesses were perfect spots to display the small black pots of Maria, the famous San Ildefonso potter. Maria was always pleased to see the warm display of her pots. She told Cliffy that it was her best advertisement. Also at the fireplace were huge double wooden shelves containing large Zia and Acoma Indian water vases. There, behind those vases, I found my special spot. There was sufficient room behind them for me to hide undetected. From my vantage point in the shadows, I could retreat from the world, escape into a book, or eavesdrop on the most interesting conversations because people were oblivious of my presence behind the Zia vase. It was a special place for me. I thought that was...
That's really
Ty,
nice.
you've done so much good research, dude. You found so much cool stuff on this place.
It's the kind of thing I think everybody who's ever been a kid can picture hiding away somewhere secret and doing their own thing.
This place is an amazing building. One night, Seth, who used to bartend here, he decided to give us like a full tour of the place, and he showed us all the secret nooks and stuff, and things like where they hit a still during Prohibition, and a little secret panel on one of the walls. Cool stuff like that. It was neat.
So unfortunately, the marriage of Cliffy and A.B. Hall did not last. They were both pretty independent people, maybe A.B. Hall more independent at that point. And according to Mary Lou Heafy, he had numerous affairs, mostly in the neighborhood just that was going up around the press club. To the point that Cliffy could look out with her binoculars and spot his car parked at whoever his latest girlfriend's house was. So by 1930,
Whoa.
their marriage came to an end. She kept the house, which I think I always like the thought that maybe she liked the house a little better than him anyway.
It was her true love. We should write a love story between her and the house. That's the real romantic interest in this story. She married for the house.
Yes. Yeah, I think she did.
That movie's never been made.
A Woman and Her House.
Yeah.
Woman and Her House.
Nonfiction.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks like nonfiction novels have to be true crime because of Truman Capote. They could be anything. You could do that. You could write about that in such an interesting way.
A woman, a house, one moment in time. Perfect. Okay, yeah.
Anyway,
I love it.
You know,
I'll
it's
write
not
it
sexual.
with you.
I mean, not like.
Oh, I think we should totally explore that.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you can use those metaphors.
Yeah. That's a whole different podcast.
Yeah, it's coming up in like an hour.
So according to Mary Lou, even though the marriage came to an end, they did remain pretty close, which I think ties in nicely to if you were here for the previous podcast or if you were watching it on live stream, there was a lot of talk about the exes that you can remain friends with or have to remain in a relationship with. And it seems that Cliffy and A.B. Continued to spend time together. According to Mary Lou, they both had a pair of binoculars, and he built a house up on the west bank of the Rio Grande, up on a ridge up there, and apparently they could see each other's houses
Oh,
from
wow.
each other's from
Story's crazy.
from their respective vantage points, and would
They
kind
were
of
just staring at each other with binoculars. And
they would like check in on each other.
Oh, it's like a
That's
Wes Anderson
sweet.
movie or something. That is so funny. Oh, that cracks me up.
It didn't, whatever lingering affection she had for A.B. Hall did not stop her from beginning a series of new romances. All sorts of men apparently dallied here with her.
Upstairs in the upstairs room, right? That was her room.
That was
wasn't it?
her room.
Yeah,
Yeah, the very top upstairs. Including a young journalist named Carl Taylor.
Something I know about. Finally.
Yeah,
That was it. No,
but
I'm
he
kidding.
came from Illinois. Is that right?
Yeah, no, he came from Indiana.
He came from Indiana.
Yeah, he was, and a lot of people came to New Mexico from Indiana for tuberculosis. The word was out on the street there.
He came here for tuberculosis.
Yeah,
Because
well,
of
no,
I didn't know
he
that.
came. Yeah,
He came to
did
get
he?
tuberculosis.
Yeah, I think he. I don't know that he was. I think he actually came specifically for the penitentes because he had been studying flagellant sects. I think
Sects.
SECTS. These,
I'm 12.
groups that whip themselves. He wrote a whole book about the groups in the Philippines, and these all trace back to the same origins. They were brought from Spain, where it originated in 1300, and when it spread across the West, this practice of whipping yourselves to atone for your own sins and otherwise punishing yourself. That was like a hardcore part of
Jesus.
like just the conquistador mentality. This was an extreme religious manifestation of
Yeah.
that, and
Feel bad.
yeah, but he came. It's interesting too, though, and of course they were
Oh,
very
yeah,
valuable in their community. Often the only law and like spiritual counsel and just general aid that there was in a community.
So he came to New Mexico twice.
Yeah.
And the first time he came was when he had this kind of romantic period with Clifford.
Yeah.
They visited different Native
Taylor.
American tribes and so
Yeah.
forth. That was kind of his interest. And
He
I think
was
he wrote
like-
some articles about that.
Yeah, he was this white dude that fancied himself like, an Indiana Jones type figure, like swashbuckling, having adventures and whatever, wearing a pith helmet literally and stuff, and he went all over. He wanted to go to the most exotic places, and he loved to send pictures back of like, this is me and the headhunters and stuff like that, which, you know what? That's a pretty cool thing to do with your life in its way, getting out there and seeing the world, and especially at that point in history when people were realizing that their little insular countries
Right.
weren't the whole of the world. They were still fetishizing and exploiting. But
Yeah, he was definitely of
Jeez.
the New Mexico is a strange and magical
He was into that, yeah.
land guy.
Yeah.
So he stayed with Clifford while he was here. Apparently borrowed a lot of money from her. And then decided he would accept an assignment writing about islands in the South Seas.
yeah, it was for. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And he told Clifford that he would come back and that he wrote her a check for all the money that he had borrowed from her.
Get a
and
load
then
of this
left
story.
town, off to whatever was in the Pacific, and then she attempted to cash the check and it was bad. And
He did that to his girlfriend. That's so crappy. That is like.
It's pretty low.
He bounced, and it was big too. It was like over $1,000 at a time when that kind of money was a lot, right?
The
Yeah, it
Whittlesey
was a
house
fair
would
amount.
never do that.
Yeah.
to her.
yeah.
Ugh. I mean, she was really rich, so limit your sympathy.
Yeah, she didn't seem to
Directed
take it
elsewhere, but-
too bad. They continued to write to each other.
Yeah.
But after his time in the South Seas, he came back here, and she was no longer into him. He was on his own at that point.
Yeah.
But that's actually when his life kind of took a pretty interesting
turn.
dark turn.
So
which
I
is Mike's
have
thing.
studied Carl Taylor excessively, and I got to say, in the story of the Carl Taylor murder, as it's now known, I tend to sympathize more with the murderer. I think the murderer is a much more interesting figure. Carl Taylor, I can't get a read on. Okay, get this. There's a sentence in one of the articles about him, and it says. This is an old article that probably used primary sources, though it doesn't cite them. Thanks. It says, this article in some old pulp magazine says, oh God, what was the exact quote? I just don't want to mess this up. It said, Carl Taylor, wherever he went, always was sure to employ a young boy to do chores around his home. And it's like, okay, maybe that's just what it says, and nothing else. But it's kind of weird. And then he was later killed by a young boy employed to do chores around his home.
Can you give us
And-
like a
Whoa.
brief rundown on that story? Like,
Okay.
So what happened? He came back here,
All
as
right.
you said, to study the
All right,
penitentes.
Carl Taylor. There was a magazine, I believe it was called Today Magazine. It was edited by Raymond Moley, who wrote the speech for Roosevelt. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. Super cool. There's a really interesting book about it. It's called Fear Itself, I think. and Raymond Moley, and Taylor's in it, and Moley's in it. But Moley was the editor of this magazine that would later combine with News-Week and become Newsweek, which of course is the long-running magazine. But he got this assignment to write about the Penitentes, and I'm sure he pitched it. He was on good terms with his editors. Another one of his editors wrote a song that's still sung today about Tripoli and pirates or something like that. It's one of those patriotic B-sides. I don't know.
Is it the Halls of Montezuma?
Yeah, that one. The Halls of... Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know
the
that
Marines
one.
sing that.
Yeah,
That's the Marines
So his other
song.
editor, I forget his name, but he wrote that. But so anyway, Taylor got this assignment to write this, and for the assignment, he went into the Penitente Murata up in San Antonio, and he wrote a letter about it later. I have
What's a
taken
Murata?
Okay, a Murata is a penitente chapel, basically.
Right.
And it's basically like a normal chapel, except there's blood all over the floors in some of the rooms, and there's an area where you can throw yourselves on beds of cactus and broken glass and stuff like that. You know, this is a specially outfitted place. I once heard a
You're not supposed to go in them unless you're a penitente.
Yeah. You know that...
Vibe?
What's that place between here and Santa Fe where they do Renaissance fairs? You remember that?
Los Golondrinas.
Los Golondrinas. Okay, so they have an old Spanish Murata there at Los Golondrinas, and they had a bagpipe concert there. It was so weird. My head like exploded. I didn't know what to do with that. A bagpipe concert in a Spanish Murata in New Mexico.
This is probably gonna have to be our last story for the night, just because we're kind of running low on time.
Oh,
but
shoot.
let's. So what happened to
What
Carl Taylor?
happened?
So what happened to Carl Taylor? So he got murdered. Everybody blamed.
He got murdered after like going into this Murata he wasn't supposed to go into, right?
Yeah, so he went to the Murata. He took a bunch of pictures. Some of these pictures have recently turned up. I'm convinced that I'm the only one researching this shit. But some of these pictures turned up in an archive in Colorado. And they're interesting. They show the inside, and they show Modesto Trujillo's grandfather. And Modesto Trujillo was the kid that killed Carl Taylor. So Modesto Trujillo's grandfather was a penitente. His father was a penitente who was also a sheep herder out at Mount Taylor. And Modesto had always said, and was quoted in the article that Taylor wrote, "My one goal is to become the Cristo, the man who's hung up on the cross and crucified at Easter time." So at first the penitentes were blamed. It was a national scandal. It went all over the place. And there were headlines in newspapers across the country. My favorite was in Ohio. It was "Blood Rights of the Scourges of Satan."
There's a movie about it too.
Yeah,
called,
1937.
what is it
Lash
called?
of the Penitentes.
Lash of the Penitentes.
The Lash of the
Yeah.
Penitentes. And it's really interesting because during the super puritanical, extra prude times when they were hacking the shit out of these movies to... I keep swearing. I'm sorry. I guess it's just we're in a historic bar. And I don't know. That's it, right? So there was this movie made, and it was totally exploitative, and they gave Carl Taylor a girlfriend who was crucified topless in his stead.
Gosh.
And Clyde Tingley, then governor of New Mexico, saw it and said, "This will be banned in the entire state of New Mexico. It will not be seen here." The only copies of it exist now have been edited down by censors to contain none of the stuff that's shown in the trailer, which is really salacious, and you can see it on YouTube, and to cut out the character of the girlfriend entirely.
It's like 25 minutes long now.
Yeah,
after they removed
it's so
all the
short,
objectionable material.
and there's weird scenes that make no sense. Why did they just show that woman getting off a train? We never see her again. But what was interesting about this was there was another filmmaker who had actually gone out and shot penitente rituals documentary style outside of Truchas, New Mexico, in northern New Mexico. I forget this guy's name, but he was the director of such classic films as Child Bride of the Ozarks.
That was Whittlesy's wife.
Yeah.
Yeah. So oh my God, it's about her. Yeah, featuring a scene in a pond apparently that made me never even want to like check this thing out. But I'm like, no thanks. Yeah, it's cool. We know the title. So anyway, this guy had filmed this and had gotten his fingers shot off while he was doing it. But this footage was spliced into the film, making it a really weird, interesting artifact because there's documentary stuff in it.
It's documentary film of things you'll never see in New Mexico today that actually happened.
Yeah.
So that was that's what happened to her boyfriend Carl Taylor.
So he trod these floors.
She had all kind. Her daughter has all kinds of crazy stories, like about the time they met Al Capone up in the Jemez Mountains.
It's true.
Supposedly, I feel like we could talk about Clifford.
We need to do an episode on Al Capone.
Yeah.
I have a good article about that.
Story all night long, but unfortunately, we are kind of running late.
I feel like this is a teaser episode because you should tell people that if you want to hear more.
If you want to hear more, you can check it out on City on the Edge, on SoundCloud, on iTunes, and all that.
And cityontheedgepodcast.com.
So Clifford lived here until 1960 when her health began to decline. and suddenly all these stairs and walking up the hills and so forth became difficult for her. So she wound up selling the house at that point to the Lambda Chi fraternity, who owned it until 1966, when it was bought by a guy called John T. Roberson, and then sold to the Press Club in 1973, who owns it to this day. However, she kind of remained like this house is associated with her to a degree. It probably shouldn't be called the Whittlesey House, even though he designed it and lived here for years or so. I kind of feel like we should maybe call it the Hall House, if we're going to call it anything, the Clifford Hall House. There are stories that her spirit returned here after her death.
We did a whole episode on that. It's our very first episode, and the sound quality is terrible.
So if you feel anything strange while you're wandering around this old building, it could be Clifford Hall. Apparently she used to play the piano, which was pretty cool. Like, she would play the piano in the dead of night, but she hasn't done that in anybody's memory. So
now she just sneezes and coughs, we hear from Hallie, and closes doors.
That's right. Or you hear strange footsteps upstairs in her old bedroom and this kind of thing.
Do staff still leave out a beer or drink for her? I read that they used
That's
to.
always crap.
do.
No one ever consistently does
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Well, I don't know.
No?
We'll
Say
have
what?
to ask.
Say what?
Leaves out
Yeah.
beer.
Little
stuff
milk.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
She's here.
They said that about the chemo, and they updated that shrine like once every year, I remember.
So anyway, thank you guys so much for coming out and seeing us this fine Saturday evening.
You guys are awesome. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I can't wait to hear everyone else tonight. This
You
is a
guys are
long,
awesome.
crazy event, you guys. Stick around for some interesting podcasts.
We are going to
If you
be
can.
joined by Albacrazy, the podcast about how crazy Albuquerque is, coming up shortly.
They never run out of
In
material.
the meantime, yes.
We do have an audience question.
Okay.
Oh, I just want to add a tidbit.
Okay.
Mike, the next time you come into my mom's house,
All right.
My dad was a photographer for the Air Force in Manila, and we have extensive photos of the penitentes.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. I would love to see those from the Philippines.
1953.
Hey, I have an original copy of Carl Taylor's 1936 book about him. We should combine these artifacts and check them out. That sounds cool.
Let's do
That's awesome. Thanks, Mark.
Let's do a quick raffle here. Does everybody have a raffle ticket?
Oh, man. You guys
Actually, we can do
are lucky.
like 3 of them right now.
We can't do it because we're the hosts.
Yeah.
Oh.
You guys are lucky.
6 of them. Holy chrome. You guys are in luck.
Hunter
There's
is
going to be 6 $10 gift certificates. Yeah, we're going to give them away one at a time.
Nice.
To Rebel Donuts. All right. So
Is it like a whole dozen donuts?
dude, that's like 2 dozen donuts.
If it's your kids, I suspect
$10.
something.
All right.
Does $10 not buy you a dozen donuts?
That'll buy you at least a dozen donuts. 123080 has won a prize.
A hand went up.
Dang.
Yay!
Nick.
Let's do 3 of them now, and then we can do 3 later, maybe.
There you go.
Okay.
I ran into Nick in a Whole Foods when I had a beard like that, and it was like 2 Jesuses meeting on the street.
All right. That's
That's
Joe.
Joe.
Joe and Nick have the same beard. Also, Zach Ratzlaff. They passed the beard around.
There's a lot of beard.
They have a beard.
You guys remember when
Beard.
Nick DePascal's beard had his own Facebook page? That was
Nice.
some funny stuff. I
Okay,
laughed hard.
next one is 123086.
Next question.
Yay!
All right.
You get
Who won?
donuts. Check out
Mara's
your chair.
mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do
see
one
you
more.
later.
You get a donut.
Let's do
you
one
get a
more
donut.
now, and then
All right.
don't go away because there's going to
Yeah.
be more great things later on tonight.
You guys, I cannot thank you enough for being the cool community that I get to be a part of. I feel so lucky.
123077. Okay.
Oh, nice.
Oh, it's Jen.
You get a donut.
Oh
Don't
my
forget
gosh.
to eat that.
Ty,
There's gonna be
remember-
a lot of
Bacon.
donuts in that house.
Maple
Remember when we
bacon.
saw The Room with Jen?
Oh yeah,
Nice.
we did. We saw the room.
Oh,
with you.
man. That was fun. That movie is so hilariously bad. I want to see the Disaster Artist
I'm
about the
so
making of it.
hey,
Great way to
we
meet
should
you.
make
Yeah.
Yeah.
we should
Thanks.
make an event.
Let's all go together. It'd be fun.
Are you guys
Okay.
done? Yes. You
Yeah.
guys good?
We're done. Thank you guys once again.
Thanks.
I wanted to read this little article. It's so funny. It's
Hey, I haven't hit stop yet. I haven't hit stop. Mike, I haven't hit stop yet. Mike, read it.
Read
I haven't stopped yet.
All right. I want to read one last thing while you guys are just milling around. Odors cause a stink. This is news from, I want to give you the date really quick so that you can contextualize this. This is news from, when did Ty say, 1989? Let's just go with 1989. Albuquerque, New Mexico. Workers were evacuated from a 3-story downtown building when a strong ether-like smell was detected, and it took 3 searches to find the culprit, a rotten orange. The building, which houses the Bernalillo County District Attorney's Office, was evacuated Wednesday while firefighters searched for the source of the odor. Nothing was found. A firefighter during the 3rd search of the building found the rotten orange in a plastic bag in the box next to the desk. You guys, this is history. This is living.
Somebody found a
rotten. It's important history.
So could you do a quick correction? I announced Albuquerque's next. It's actually Women, Wit, and Wine.
Women, Wit, and Next is actually next, not Albuquerque. But I think we are going to get Albuquerque later tonight, right?
Albuquerque's later.
Okay, all right. Okay, stay tuned.
Want to watch that?
Did you have a good time?
I'm having a good time.
You think it turned out okay?
I think so.
Dude, you did such good research. I did so much good research.
Here.
Oh, yeah.
I so enjoyed it.
Okay,
This is really super interesting. I think she's so amazing.
I feel like we could really
Yeah, I really.